Hey guys, Board now back with you, back with Rachel McDonald, and on this video we return to the Haunting of Hill House. So this is going to be episode 8. It is called Witness Marks, and it is set on Halloween night, so a nice spooky setting for this one. And it's sort of the fallout from Luke going missing at the end of the last episode, where he basically ran off and stole Shirley's car, and they were worried about him again because they felt he's sort of fallen into old ways. And so in this one there's kind of like a scrambling between the family and desperation to get to him and figure out exactly where he's going. It turns out he's heading to Hill House, and more is revealed later in the episode about why he's going to Hill House. And it sort of divides it a bit, where you have a lot of stuff with Shelley and with Theo at the funeral home, and you get a particular fallout from an incident involving Theo and Kevin. Personal stuff that's brought up when Steve goes on a car trip with his father, with who. So that's the general basics of it. So Witness Marks is the episode, and what did you think?
So this one I feel is a little bit of a filler episode. It's kind of there to get us from point A to point B. So we basically had all the big emotional stuff at the funeral. That was the previous episode that we did. Some reconciliations have happened. Some fights have happened. So I feel like this episode, it's interesting because while I do feel like it's a filler episode, it's also an episode that is still needed, because we needed to go through the emotional beats that happen in this episode. So like you mentioned, we have the fallout from Theo and Shirley's husband, and Shirley is obviously still very upset at Theo about that, and they're trying to, reconcile that. And I really love the scenes with Steve and his dad, because I think I've talked about in some of our previous episodes that I find that relationship really heartbreaking, because you see in the flashbacks how much Steve loved his dad, how he looked up to him and he wanted to help him with the house, and it was such a close-knit family. And I think of all the siblings, Steve has become the most estranged with the father. So to see them actually spend some one-on-one time together, I found very interesting. And I think a lot of the emotional fallout from the previous 2 episodes you see kind of here. Like, I made a note here. I was like, one of the saddest lost relationships is Steve and his dad, because they were so close. And we see some more flashbacks, and we find out in this episode, which I really like, because we know that Steve as a character is very cynical and he doesn't believe in the ghost stories. But we find out in this episode that he has seen ghosts, that he's seen ghosts at the house and just hasn't recognized them for what they are. And I find that quite relatable, because I've spoken about before how I'm a very cynical person. So I would be like Steve. If I actually did see something supernatural, I probably wouldn't even recognize it for what it was. So you find out that in his book he wrote about a man who was repairing a clock, and his dad's like, yeah, Steve, no one was ever repairing that clock, because that clock could only be repaired by a handful of people in the world. You find out about that Luke's treehouse wasn't real, and we're going to get more revelations about that treehouse and that particular spot. And so I really like that. I do find Shirley and Theo scenes a little hard to take, I think, because I find Shirley very hard to deal with, and I think that she is incredibly harsh in this episode. And again, as we move into later episodes, we're going to find out that she's being really harsh and a little bit hypocritical. But I do like Theo's breaks down towards the end of the episode, and we'll get into that and what that entails. So overall, even though I do feel like this was a bit of a filler episode, it was kind of only there to move the characters from the funeral home to the big showdown at the house. I think it contained a lot of important emotional beats that we really needed.
Quite good backstory again, like you said, with Steve and the father and the past at Hill House. And the stuff with those two, it's very personal. I really like the way it's shot, actually, the way it's framed them in the car, and it just gives it this more personal, intimate feeling.
Yes, more intimate,
Yeah, because it's almost this thing where Steve's like confronted with it now, whereas before he could come up with reasons to not confront his father, and there's other stuff going on, there's family stuff. But I think that's obviously why he made the decision to go with him, because he's like, I need to
Yes.
get him on his own. I need to talk about this stuff. And he starts giving him advice. He does this speech about, fighting with love. And he starts asking, doesn't he, about his relationship with Lee and
Yes.
the whole marriage. And so he's giving some kind of advice based on his experience. So that's all good stuff. And again, it's quite cathartic because of the way Steve breaks down by the end of the conversation, where he's a bit too harsh, blaming the dad for Liv's death and what have you, and but he does obviously open up emotionally, saying I miss my mum and stuff. And
I know, my heart broke
it's
at
a
that
moving scene.
moment.
Yeah, it's definitely a powerful scene view, but yeah,
Mm.
those scenes are hard to watch, but I think Theo's sort of doing her best really to be there, and also her explanation I find quite sort of striking, and the metaphor of that, than really because with her it's more than any other character, it's this sense of her almost looking for a way, I think, out of the darkness, because obviously she's clouded in it so much, and she uses that as says, Kevin was just something in the darkness. And
Yeah.
I think it goes to Thea's character as well, that she would like rationale it like that rather than saying, yeah, sorry, I mean, I was kind of into him and it was a thing. She does actually like rationales it and says, yeah, I mean, in a way, it didn't mean anything. It's just he was there, and I'm going through all this stuff, and it's just something in the darkness, just something for me to cling on to.
Previous episode, her touching Nell's body, and obviously we know that Theo has that kind of psychic touch. So she touches Nell's body, and then she screams. She lets out that horrifying scream and just collapses onto the floor. And we don't know exactly, what she felt. And so in this episode, we find out that when she touched her, the explanation she gives is that she felt nothing. Like as soon as she touched Nell's body, all she felt was numb and darkness and cold. And she was alone in the dark. And she's saying, and I tried to drink and I couldn't feel anything. And I tried to get angry and I couldn't feel anything. And I called Trish and she came over and I couldn't feel anything. And then, like you were saying, she talks about how, the lights went off. She was in the dark. She reached for someone and it happened to be Kevin. And then as soon as that happened, she's like, I'm so glad it happened because it made me feel something again. I started to feel shame. I started to feel guilt. And I think that Theo touching Nell's body and feeling nothing from like an existential point of view is actually quite horrifying. This idea, I mean, obviously within this canon and this universe, we find out that it's not true, but this idea that when you die, that's all that death is. This is nothing after that, just this empty, cold darkness. And like she said, she's like, and I was wondering is that where Nell is? Is that where Mum is? Is that all that they have now? Just this being alone in the dark. And I actually have a bit of a fear of death because of the unknown of it. So something like that really hits home for me, because it's just like, what if that is all there is after death? So the fact that Theo can feel that is so horrifying. And you can see during her breakdown that Shirley wants to stay like hardened and wants to stay angry, but you can see that she is, she's starting to cry. She's starting to understand what exactly Theo's gone through. And while they don't exactly reach a place of forgiveness, she offers Theo her hand and helps her back up. And I just think it's a really powerful scene. I think that what's her name? The actress who's in it, Katie, can't remember her actual name. That's the one. Yes, I think she does such a great job in that scene of portraying Theo's grief and the fear that she feels. And of course, as with all of them, it's bringing up stuff to do with their mother. And like, I just found that scene really, really heartbreaking. I think it's one of the better scenes in the episode. And yeah, I just that idea of blackness and darkness in death is quite horrifying for me. So I found that scene quite effective. Did you like that scene?
Oh, I did, yeah. And I think as we go along in this series, I think we're getting more into ideas of what death might be like like all the afterlife, and obviously there's a little bit of religion that plays a part as well. But yeah, I think it goes quite well with Thea's character. It does feel like something where, yeah, in many ways she does have this sort of side to her, and just some of the stuff and some of the isolation with her, and yeah, no, that again, set in the castle thing, but where something and again they subtly work in a supernatural type element where something might be controlling the car, and that's an effective little horror scene as well.
One of the best jump scares I've ever come across is that scene where Nell just pops out of the back seat. It's just like horrifying. It's fantastic. Jump scares usually don't get to me anymore because, I mean, you'd understand this. When you watch enough horror, you start to see jump scares coming from a mile away. But I think Hill House has several that are just so good. And I remember the first time I watched that episode, scared the crap out of me, that jump scare, like Nell just jumping out. And I recently found out that apparently that was one of those things where she was supposed to jump out later in the scene and the director told her to jump out earlier, so the reactions you see from the two girls are actually genuine. So I like stuff like that, you know, especially in horror films. You want a feeling of authenticity. So I just love, it's a great jump scare, it's a great horror moment, but it's also kind of a sad moment because it's like it's Nell's presence being there and realizing that her sisters are fighting and not wanting her sisters to fight. And it's like Nell from the beyond jumping in going, come on, like, cut it out. You know, she wants her family to kind of still, to be together. So there's a lot of layers in that scene. So I think that one's really good. I also really like the flashback scenes in this episode because we start to get, again, more pieces of the puzzle. We see, you know, Steve witnessing his mother seemingly talking to herself. He makes her that beautiful, he restores that vanity cabinet for her, and then she smashes it. And I think it's really interesting. Again, we've seen this with Steve, where he believes that everything is down to mental illness, and he believes that his family has this history of mental illness. And in this episode, because we finally get to see from his perspective what it looked like with his mother, you can understand why he's come to that conclusion and why he's decided that it is a mental illness. And then, of course, we get the revelation that he had a vasectomy when he was in college before he even had a partner. He was that scared of having kids and passing on the illness, and then that's caused the friction in his marriage.
That's a big reveal, obviously. That's quite depressing in some ways. You know?
It is, isn't it? Because it really gets to the heart of Steve's fear and how scared he is of this mental illness being passed down to his children. Like, it really shows you how much his mother's death scarred him. And I also find it quite heartbreaking and horrifying when he's talking about how he read the coroner's report and he's like, she had bruises on her arms from someone grabbing her. She had a contusion on the back of her head from flying into a wall. Like, again, this would raise questions with his father of what happened that night. What did you do to my mother before she killed herself? And you can understand, again, I do agree that he can be very harsh with the father, but when you hear all of this, you can kind of understand why he is so. I mean, I imagine reading something like that would be quite horrifying.
Well, yeah, and I think this time around watching Hill House, I've sort of gone changed a bit on the stuff with Hugh and stuff. I think he's become more sympathetic to me this time, and obviously you can definitely see why Steve would have questions, and the way the dad mysteriously disappeared back then, and obviously it is very strange and very hard for someone that young to believe that something off might have been going on with his mum or whatever the case may be. And so naturally later on in life he's going to have questions, so that's very relatable, and you would have those sorts of questions, especially if you haven't been given a clear narrative.
Their feelings after the funeral. The funeral has obviously they're all devastated over Nell, but the funeral has obviously brought up everything to do with their mother, and they're all just trying to, I think Theo stumbling around in the dark is just a great analogy. Like, it's the perfect description for what they're all going through at the moment. They're all just kind of walking through the dark, trying to make sense of what happened, trying to make sense of what happened 25 years previously, or however long it was since Olivia died. And it's really sad. It's really heartbreaking just watching this family that was once so close become so splintered. And so I think that this episode, it shows them starting to heal a little bit. We start to get on the path to the end. We're getting towards the end of the series, so we're kind of getting to the point where they have to start healing, they have to start talking, they have to start actually communicating. And then, of course, we get the reveal at the end of the towards the end of the episode. They find out that Luke is heading towards the house. He's going back. And Theo mentions at the beginning of the episode that suicide can come in family in clusters. So at first they were worried that he was going to go and use, but now they're worried that he's going to go and kill himself, especially because she points out twins also apparently, suicide can cluster, which I could definitely believe. I imagine having a sibling die is horrifying. And I know that suicide can cluster with siblings in general, but having a twin, someone that you're that connected to, that you're that close to. And obviously with this series, there's a little bit of a supernatural link between Luke and Nell. So we find out that he's going to the house, and you kind of just want to be like, no, Luke, don't do it, like stay away, but
because I think it's here, isn't it? He mentions about, I think it's here, isn't it? Mentions about how he's going to try and destroy the house, but the house won't let him, sort of thing.
Yes, and we see that happen. We see Luke go there and pour gasoline everywhere, and light a lighter, and it just whoops, it just goes out. It doesn't even spark, and it's just in that moment, I think you really realize how insidious and how horrifying this house can be. That it has that power to not even allow anyone to destroy it. And then, of course, we see Olivia's actual ghost, because we've seen Hugh carry around a version of Olivia with him, but we see her actual ghost in the house, and then Luke is taken by the house, which leads into the final episode. So I think with this one, there's not that much to get into. The direction's really good. The emotional stuff is really good. We get some more flashback. But like I said, I feel like this episode is here mostly to get us from point A to point B so that we can have that final showdown at the house and get to the, the final, the finale. So I think that's kind of what this episode is.
Yeah, I mean, it's effective in doing that. Like you said, it doesn't really feel like the stuff here that you don't need. It sort of all feels great. It's just that it's not maybe the most packed. It's the one where it slows down a little bit, and you get some maybe more important character stuff. But it's obviously a big sort of statement. I think then it's Luke that goes to the house to try and destroy it, and I think maybe partly because of losing now his sister, his twin, and what have you, and the whole significance of that. But I will say, actually, probably line of the episode is from Shelley, where she says, "Did you just punch my boob?"
I love that. That's brilliant.
Because that's a good line to
Yeah, because she and Shirley are having that fight, and Shirley just kind of turns around and whacks her, and Theo's just like, did you just do that? And I love Shirley's response. Shirley's like, yeah, she's kind of like,
yeah, I did it, bitch. Deal with it.
Oh no, I do love that. That's brilliant. And I also think that's such a sibling thing as well. Yeah. Like, I love when you see stuff like that. Like, that's a total sibling thing to do. Did you just punch me in the boob? Yeah. What of it? Yeah, I like those little bits of humor that are kind of sprinkled in there. So that's a great one.
Yeah, because that's a good physical sort of fight, which again has a sibling sort of feel to it, like you said. So that's a good light moment. Yeah, I enjoy the scene. So I think that's one where I think they just let the scene sort of hang out and flow, and the actors really got into it and made it quite physical. So that was fun.
I also like, actually, while we're talking about that scene, I like that Theo points out that one of the reasons that she lives in Shirley's garden flat is for Shirley's sake, because Shirley is such a closed off person, but she also needs her family. And Theo's like, I'm here for you, Shirley. I'm here because you shut people out and you don't let people close, and I'm here to support you. And I think that's actually like a really kind of beautiful way of showing that Theo really does know her sister. And it also, I love Steve's description of Theo as basically being a closed fist with hair. He's talking about like how they all have like different issues, and he's like, Theo's basically just a clenched fist with hair. And I'm like, that's brilliant. So again, you see these kind of sibling dynamics work out, and you see which siblings have been able to remain close and which siblings haven't. And yeah, I really do like the dynamic between Shirley and Theo. And I think that all the actors they cast have really good chemistry and are very believable as siblings. So they've got some good sibling dynamic stuff going in this one. And like we said, the stuff between Hugh and Steve is just, it's fantastic and very sad, but also very cathartic that we're finally getting, you know, they're getting some emotions out, they're getting some anger out. Because, I mean, the worst thing you can do in these situations is hold everything in and not communicate. And you get the feeling that this family does not know how to communicate well. So the fact that even though what they're saying is horrible, at least they're getting it out. So I think that's
I think after all these years with families, I mean, even if you didn't have all this darkness in the past, you know, it's still unhealthy if you went all these years without communicating, because you would naturally have things to talk about, and you know, it gets to the point where you do need to open up about some of this stuff. So it's and obviously narratively it works well because it's sort of heading towards the end game, and they obviously need to come together to try and do the right thing and have an understanding by the end of the episode. And similar with Steve and with Who, really. So even if they still have begrudgments, it's like they do understand that we need to get on the same page. And
definitely.
So okay, so that's episode 8. That's Witness Marks. If you've been following the show along with us, do let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Like and subscribe. Share us out on social media. I can tell you that our next big TV review will be another Netflix show, and that will be Stranger Things. And that's because there's a new season this year, and definitely one we want to cover on the channel. So we'll be doing the original 3 seasons in the run up to season 4 this year, which is definitely shaping up to be one of the big TV events of the year. So we'll be working our way through the old series to lead into that. So as soon as we've done Hill House, we'll be making a start on Netflix. So look out, Netflix, Stranger Things. So look out for those reviews in the coming weeks on the channel. But thanks for listening, and we'll be back with more Hill House soon. See you later, guys. Goodbye.